Hello, once again there, digital world. Welcome back to another episode of Spliced In Later, continuing the American summer blockbuster season of new movies pretty much every week to review and talk about. This one is a little later than I would normally plan to release it. It's been well over 24 hours since I last saw the film, but I had to let it sit with me for a bit. If I had given you this review immediately after watching the film, it would have been a miserable experience to listen to. And we'll get into that in a minute. If you don't know what we're about to talk about today, and that would be strange, because why would you click on this if you didn't see what the title of it was? But who knows? We are reviewing Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, the fifth Indiana Jones film in the very popular franchise starring Harrison Ford as archaeologist slash swashbuckling adventurer from those old pulp story type serials from the 30s, who runs around with his whip and his fedora trying to mainly stop Nazis from acquiring mythical items because the Nazis want to use them to do bad Nazi things. There's always a sense of mysticism and supernatural grounded in the realism. So half the movie will be Indy running around just doing fisticuffs and driving motorbikes and planes, and the other half will be him conversing with 1 million year old knights from the Crusades, seeing Nazis' faces melt, having men rip hearts for sacrificial things, or even aliens. Indiana Jones is one of my favorite things. I don't talk about it as much as probably Star Wars and Marvel and all those other things, just because there's not that much content for me to talk about. Indiana Jones has a solid original trilogy run that ran from 1982 to 1989, and then an additional film that came out in 2008. This fifth one has been in the works for quite some time. It's taken many different shapes, many different forms as it's been going along. I believe in the past there was a reflection that Harrison Ford was too old for the role, especially because Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull lent towards that concept. So it was, shall we recast him as a new one? I think for a long time there was the common belief that Chris Pratt was going to be the new Indiana Jones. They certainly thought so when they created his character for the Lego Movie 2. But then there was all this stuff about Harrison Ford being like, no one can ever play Indiana Jones but me. If anyone's going to do the movie, it's going to be me, but I don't want to do it unless there's a good story, and if I do it, it's going to be the last one. And then Steven Spielberg, the visionary director behind all the Indiana Jones films, he doesn't want to do it. George Lucas doesn't want to do it. So we bring in James Mangold to direct it, who did do the exceptional Logan film, which showed that he could take old superheroes and give them one last hurrah. And then filming this thing, Harrison Ford broke like nearly every bone in his body doing this film. He's 80 years old. It comes out in film festivals, and the reviews are polarizing. Some people think it's the worst film they've ever seen, and others think, it's a return to form for Indiana Jones, which makes the whole thing very apprehensive for me, because Indy has a very special place to me in my youth growing up. I rewatched those movies, those original three, over and over again. The Indiana Jones ride at Disneyland is one of my all-time favorite rides. I watched the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. Even Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, when that came out in 2008, that was around the time I was starting to really get into movies as well, and the movie-going experience. That movie was one of my first get a bunch of people from school, bring them all together after school to go and watch a movie together, where we take up an entire row. But for my viewings, it wasn't those rambunctious teenagers you get in movie theaters. Mine was everybody bees quiet, because we're watching the movie now. We could talk about it afterwards, but for now, shut the hell up. So I was excited to see this film, also apprehensive, but I was under the assumption I was going with two other friends. One is a huge Indiana Jones fan, so much so that they will often dress up as him. They've got the whole outfit, and he looks pretty great doing it. Another who is like the exact opposite of me when it comes to giving films a chance or expectation versus reality. I tend to lean towards more giving movies a chance, benefit of the doubt. I'm the one that'll be, Morbius isn't a completely terrible film. Whereas he'll be like, I expect it to be terrible, it's fine, it was okay, nothing special. Unless it's a Spider-Man film, it hasn't impressed me all that much. Certain things maybe might surprise me, but don't hold your breath. So I expected that even if this movie was going to be terrible, I'd probably have a good time with it. And notoriously, as much as I love Indiana Jones, I'm told I have terrible taste in them, which tracks with what I know. So from those original three, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, and The Last Crusade, the common consensus among moviegoers everywhere, Indiana Jones diehard fans, is Raiders of the Lost Ark is the best film. The best one of the franchise, probably one of the best films ever made. Always included in movies you have to see before you die. Top 100 films ever, all that sort of stuff. Then the consensus is after that, it's Last Crusade. It's the final Indiana Jones adventure where he teams up with his father, played by Sean Connery. They go after the Holy Grail. More of a light-hearted adventure. It's more of a PG than an M, but sort of still in that Raiders of the Lost Ark style adventure. And then Temple of Doom for a while was the least favorite. That's the one where everything was really dark and disturbing and pushed that PG-13 rating, but also with some real goofy shit in there as well. And then the consensus is Kingdom of the Crystal Skull comes out in 2008. Apparently it's not only a bad Indiana Jones film, it's the worst film ever. It's terrible. So if you're an Indiana Jones fan, you just pretend it doesn't exist. You don't acknowledge its existence, you ignore it, and you just focus on the main three. For me, I actually think Raiders of the Lost Ark is my least favorite of that original three, which is a controversial thing to say, but I really like Last Crusade. That's my favorite one. It could be that's because it was also the first Indiana Jones film I saw, but it's kind of like, it's that age-old, do you like Rocky or Rocky 2? It's what you want out of your Indiana Jones movie. And what I want out of my indie film, I get in Last Crusade. Then I actually like Temple of Doom next, because I like the weird mood and darkness mixed with happy-go-lucky slapstick stuff that's going on in there. Raiders is quite good too, but of the three, it's the one I would choose to watch the least out of them, which is very controversial to say. And Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I don't really get why everybody hates it. It's certainly not as good as the original three. I will give you that. But I don't think it's terrible. I think it is still an Indiana Jones film. It's a bit bonkers in that it deals with aliens and Crystal Skull alien deities. And there are some weird stuff going on in there. But when you watch it, along with all the other Indiana Jones, it still feels like an indie film. And I don't not want to watch it. And it gave us the whole concept of Indiana Jones climbing in a lead-lined fridge to survive a nuclear explosion. Yes, that's dumb, but it's kind of dumb enough for me to go, that's fine. So because of that, I actually was under the assumption that that would mean that I would like this film. If you haven't summed up by now, the way I'm dancing around it, because I don't really want to talk about it, I don't like this film. Unfortunately, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is my least favorite Indiana Jones film, and definitely one of my least favorite films of the year. Not because it's bad. It's not a bad, affronting, insulting movie. It is just, for me, it's hella boring. I really didn't get into it. The movie didn't justify for me its existence, its reason for pulling Harrison Ford up saying, hey, you're 80 years old, but we really want you to get back in the saddle and be Indiana Jones again. Surprisingly though, when the movie lights went up, I turned to my friends to begin the discussion of why we all hated this film. Turns out the other two liked it a lot. In fact, when they were saying, I wouldn't go so far as to say I loved it, but I thought they were having me on. And they were genuinely like, no, it's better than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull by a large mile. I was like, what are you talking about? So what that comes down to is either I'm becoming the very thing I swore to destroy, which is the negative person. I started this podcast to be all about, let's look at the positives for movies. Let's not focus on the negative. Or Indiana Jones is a very unique franchise and character concept where a lot of people can like it for very specific things that doesn't gel for everybody else. But not everybody has to like the same thing about Indiana Jones, I guess. I don't know. Someone summed it up quite well in a little review of the whole franchise I watched before the thing, which is that each Indiana Jones movie kind of stands on its own little adventure. It's very rarely does it rely on you having to have seen previous Indiana Jones films or know his history. if you're familiar with characters that reappear in later films, you might go, oh, I know them. But it never assumes that you should know these characters, so we don't need to introduce them or anything like that. You can pick out any Indiana Jones film and watch it on its own, and it stands on its own. So I think it's going to be interesting going forward when people talk about this movie. What's it going to be? At the moment, the consensus I've seen online is people don't like it. But I am seeing more and more reviews pop up now that are in the complete opposite. So we'll have to wait and see. For me personally, though, I really just could not get into it. I will start with the positive. So the brief plot, if you want to know, is it's the tale of Indiana Jones. First, we start off during the closing days of World War II, where he and a colleague are trying to get one of the thing that Indy does best, which is look for an artifact that the Nazis want to use to help Hitler conquer the world. In this case, it's the spear that pierced Jesus and made him bleed. During that escapade, though, they come across half of what is known as the Dial of Archimedes, the Dial of Destiny, the MacGuffin of this film. What that is, it's vague because no one really knows, but the concept is that if you have this dial, you can detect fissures in time. So it's essentially something that will point you to a place where you can go and travel in time, which you might say, oh wow, for a time travel thing for Indiana Jones. This is a guy that's faced down aliens and seen people age to death in front of him. Like, it's not unusual for this sort of thing to happen. I think he works better when he's adjacent to the supernatural rather than engaging with it, which we'll get into later. Him observing a 100-year-old Crusader knight from the Last Crusade, but not going back to the Crusades. So that's where we sort of go off the rails in this one, for say. But then we flash forward to 1969. Indiana Jones is now a very, very grumpy old man. And in a sort of pathetic place in his life. He's lost his family again. He's being forced into retirement at the university. He has no one. He doesn't hang out with anybody. He does not have any sort of social life. He's just miserable. But then his goddaughter, who is the daughter of the colleague that went on their adventure with him at the start of the film, shows up to ask more questions about this dial. And then it turns out that there's a whole race to get it. Some Nazis they encountered back then at the start of the film, they're back, they're on the trail, because it turns out Indy still has half this dial there. And Indy gets swept up in the thing. Partly not by choice. He's not like, I have to go and do this. He's sort of pushed along and forced to engage in a lot of what's going on. The goddaughter character, Helena, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, is like a Han Solo ruffian sort of play both sides character. It's like, I'm after this dial for money to pay off loan sharks. The Nazis obviously want it because the Nazis lost World War II. What if we didn't? What if we won? Indiana Jones just wants to go home and go to sleep in his bed, essentially. And then it's a typical Indiana Jones film. They go from place to place across the world, following clues, picking up pieces that lead to other clues. All the while, the Nazis are always a step behind them. They pick up some allies to help out in certain situations, all culminating in a big, grand spectacle involving Archimedes' dial and how it eventually ends up for the Nazis as well as for Indy himself. So the positives here in the movie is that Harrison Ford was great as Indiana Jones, which is a big deal for me to say that, because if you look at Harrison Ford's work, he doesn't really care when he is in a lot of movies. A lot of it you can tell he's just doing it for a paycheck, or because as an actor, he's expected to do this stuff. But he's very notorious for throwing it in, doing stupid performances, half committed because he doesn't really care. Very rarely will he commit to a performance, and even then, you get him to commit when you've promised him that you'll never have to make him commit again. It's kind of like why he's really great as Han Solo in The Force Awakens when Star Wars came back. But when they kept forcing him to come back as Force ghosts and things later on, you can tell he's like, fine, but I'm not fucking cutting my hair. It doesn't matter if I died with short hair. I'm going to have long hair when I'm a ghost. That sort of thing. Which I guess might contribute to this, because this is Indiana Jones' last adventure. We've been promised It definitely will be, unless Harrison Ford dies, and then probably a week later it'll be announced that they'll reboot the franchise. But probably because of that, because he knows this is his last time doing it, he really commits to the performance. You really believe that you are watching an 80-year-old Indiana Jones. You believe where he would be up until his point in that life, how he reacts to things, the commitment to the action spectacles. The whole opening act for this film is great, by the way. It really reminded me of an actual Indiana Jones film I wanted to see. But obviously they used de-aging on Harrison Ford's face to make him look young. So even though sometimes when he's running, you can tell it is an old man running, the commitment to that really makes you go, yes, this is the Indiana Jones I know and love. Some of the supporting people in here as well were really enjoyable to watch as well. Phoebe Waller-Bridger as his goddaughter Helena was an intriguing character. I really enjoyed her character arc in the story and her interplay with sometimes being Indy's ally, sometimes being a hindrance. And the villain of the film, played by Mads Mickelson, he was a great villain. A jaded Nazi who knew in the early days that the reason Germany lost World War II because Hitler sucked as a leader. So his whole thing is like, what if Hitler wasn't the leader? What if I was instead? What if I could go back and be a better Hitler than Hitler? And he's very, very cartoonishly evil, but in a way that's really enjoyable to watch. He's definitely one of my favorite Indiana Jones villains by far. The problem with the movie for me is that it just felt disinterested. It felt tired. It felt lackluster. Now, I may have shot myself in the foot when I prepared for this film, because I did go back and rewatch all the Indiana Jones films because it had been a long time since I'd watched them. I wanted to get back to that. So it may be that having just seen The Good, to go into this and be like immediately comparing it to that might be unfair. I also think maybe it's not for me in terms of what they were going for. The whole vibe of the film basically is that Indy is very old. He is an old man who is tired, who is beaten down, who is depressed, miserable. So his attitude to what's going around him sort of bleeds into the adventure itself as just defeated, sleepy, that sort of thing. But for me, that vibe is there across the whole film, and as such, I just could not get into it. The opening titles alone, while they're starting it up, it's like Disney presents Lucasfilm, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Like the title credits just sort of come up while people are walking down a hallway, and it's not the bombastic Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. It's just Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. If you're going for a character study into a beloved franchise character in his final years, you already did that. It was Logan, and that worked perfectly. For something like Indiana Jones is not a character. I think he's never really been explored as a character. He's got a fear of snakes. He has commitment issues. All his students at the university want to have sex with him, and he's seen some shit. But at the end of the day, for me, I normally go to an Indiana Jones movie. I put it on because I want to have a fun time. I want to see cool spectacle stunts and wonderful uplifting music running around and all this sort of thing going on. And everything here, just the pacing just felt tired and lackluster. The iconic thing in this film where you have them traveling across the world, so they'll get in an airplane and then you see the map lines as they go across the world. The music then was just like it was like, what? Come on, give me something to latch onto. There were characters in here that showed up to do nothing and were not properly introduced, in my opinion. If you want to go see this film because John Rhys-Davies is back as Sala, let me tell you, even if you didn't know who Sala was, you would be confused as to what he is and why he's in the movie. He shows up, he punches a guy, he drives Indiana Jones to the airport, and then he says, "See you later," and that's it, until the very end of the movie where he shows up and goes, "Hey, does anyone have any donuts? No? Okay, I'll go get some." That's it. Antonio Banderas shows up as a sidekick for Indiana Jones because he's got a boat. I was baffled that he was introduced. He went, "Indy!" He waved to him. And then he was in 4 separate scenes and no one spoke to him, No one acknowledged him. He didn't engage in the plot. I understand that he might not be an important character to what's going on, but you still have to introduce people. You have to make them relevant to the scene. You cannot just have people hanging around and be like, okay, cool, yep, see you later. It makes me angry thinking about that sort of stuff. That just felt lazy to me. There were odd choices in characters' motivations and development. Things weren't always clear exactly what was going on. One thing that's probably not the movie's fault as well is it is all CG as well, which I get it. Harrison Ford is 80. He's not going to ride an actual motorbike down a cliff in the desert. And to be fair, most movies these days will opt to shoot action scenes in front of a CGI screen than actually get a real life train and have actors hanging on the outside of it, as they used to do in the olden days. But because Indiana Jones is so famous for that visual style, in this one, where you're seeing Harrison Ford sitting in front of a green screen trying to drive his tuk-tuk really fast, and he's bouncing down a staircase, and the tuk-tuk isn't real as well because that's CG. It just felt lifeless and cold to me. By the end of the film, where the time travel stuff happens, it goes completely off the rails for me. I was not having fun. I just wanted it to be over. The movie is 2.5 hours long, so it is long. And if you are not hooked into this film, you are going to feel every second of it. And I don't feel like the film has any sort of resolution. It kind of just stops. It sort of tries to hint at Indiana. The idea is that he doesn't feel like he's relevant in the world anymore. So when he's in the past, it's like, this is where he belongs with history. But then the way they solve it, and then he ends up back in the present day or whatever, is just so jarring and so undignified. I hated it. I give this a 4 out of 10. It's the worst Indiana Jones film. And I know people will disagree with me because Kingdom of the Skull apparently is the worst. But at least that one, I felt like I could have some fun with it. I felt like I was watching an Indiana Jones film. This, I just felt like some people showed up to Hollywood one day wanting to make some other film, and then someone said, you have to make an Indiana Jones film first. Go on. I'm not leaving until you do. And then they did. And then they were allowed to be let free from their cage. As I said, I will be interested to see how other people react to this. I could just be a big old grumpy Gus, especially with the shock at seeing how my friends were like, that was good. I really liked that. But for me personally, it just felt without heart. It felt without soul. It felt lackluster. If this is the end for Indiana Jones, I don't feel like doing a binge watch of all 5 movies to start off so triumphantly and then just end with this awkward shot of Harrison Ford reaching for a CGI window on a CGI street to pick up a CGI fedora in his pajamas. Yeah, no thanks. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. I promise to try and lighten up with the next one. So in a couple of weeks, I'll be reviewing Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. That is one of my most anticipated movies of the year. So I'm apprehensive, but I feel like we could turn it around and I could really like that one, but I thought I'd really like this one. You just never know. And that's the beautiful thing about movies. Sometimes you can be truly impressed and revolutionized with what you see, and sometimes you can just go home and cry into your pillow. The choice is yours. I'll be back next week for probably just a regular episode. I'll try and finish off my Nolan run before Oppenheimer comes back as well. So be sure to tune in for that. Well, it doesn't come back. It'll be released. Whatever. You know what I mean. Until then, I love and appreciate you as always. Thank you very much for listening to me bitch for so long. And who knows? When I buy Dial of Destiny on DVD, we could have a 2019 Hellboy situation where I suddenly realize not only is it a good movie, it is the best movie I've ever seen. Only time will tell. I'll see you all next week. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.